Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing an abandoned space illustration. But first let's just start off by some warm-up sketches and let's study some materials. I just started off with a basic shape for a wooden plank. For this type of tutorials I'm actually just using airbrush and the G pen, just default brushes. You might see that I changed the name of the brushes, but don't worry, they're just the default brushes. I actually recommend just using 2 or 3 brushes and just get really familiar with them, so you can be very comfortable working with them. And after that you can just switch it up to more complex texture brushes. So as you can see, I just started off with a basic plank. I added a bit of airbrush to make a soft gradient. And after that just make small lines across the plank, so you will have a wooden texture. Yeah, let's call it that way. Don't worry too much about the colors, you can actually adjust them. I use a lot of color balance, saturation, brightness, contrast. You can find them up the screen in edit and tone correction. Since we're making organic texture, just use wobbly lines. Wobbly lines are really perfect. Use the eraser to chip a bit at the hard edges. Here I made a new multiply layer and just added a bit more scratches and texture. Just have fun with this part. There is no strict rule, just follow the horizontal lines or the vertical lines you already made. Small lines like this will help with the wood texture, so it will make it look more appealing. Just keep in mind this is, let's just call it a new plank, so it's not aged, so don't go overboard with the cracks and texture and the damages that can appear with the passing of time. Use the airbrush for very soft shadows and use the G pen with a slightly lighter color. I prefer to use it on the edges of the plank because it gives more structure to it. So I guess this is the basic shape. I actually went a bit overboard and added more detail. This is just a normal layer and I added lines to accentuate some parts of the plank. Make sure to, randomize the lines and the airbrush. It's an organic matter, so it's better to be a bit random. However, make sure you have a good base, otherwise it will actually fall apart. So I actually continued to add a bit more lines and finish the plank below, and it's almost done. I use a lot of airbrush and eraser. And for the final steps, I actually like to merge everything up and add a final color correction. I actually like to merge my layers. I'm very confused if I have too many layers all over the place, but each to their own. Up in this corner I just added the brushes that I use, the G pen, the airbrush, a harsh eraser and a soft airbrushy eraser. You may notice I have changed the name of my own brushes, but don't worry, they're the default brushes. You can find these basic brushes in every program as far as I know, but I will make a video on that really soon. So we're done with the wood texture, so now let's try some stone wall. It's actually stones, but sharpened by human hands. I actually want to call them bricks, but I don't know if it's the right word. So anyway, we do the same thing, just make basic shapes. So you might notice I like to work on 2 layers, a lighter layer above and a darker layer underneath. This will give a good perspective and make the object look more 3D. After that I just make extra layers for each of the tones and just clip them on the specific layer that you want. For the next step I actually use the hard brush and make some random dots and add the blur effect on them. You can find the blur effect up in the menu in filter, blur, and just test them out, see whichever you like best. I mainly use Gaussian blur, that one. Words are hard, but I promise I do my best. So next step, just use the lasso tool or magic wand or whatever the name, and make some hard edges on the stones, on the bricks. If you work with above layer and under layer, this step is super easy. You don't need to worry about going outside the lines. Well, they actually look like bricks now. So for the next few steps, I feel the need of adding a bit of color. So I'm just testing out different tones and modes, like overlay, screen, or add glow. I think that's the three I use the most. And once I'm happy with it, I just go ahead and add some sharp edges. It's a stone, so it reflects light a bit more intensely. I also added small dots with the eraser and a bit of extra color near the dot, so it will actually look like a dent. A very small dent and small cracks. Let's consider the brick, it's still a new brick. Or stone, the stone is new. It was recently sculpted, so let's pretend that's the case. And you do the same step for every brick that you want. I actually made different layers for every brick, but you can actually just make one lighter brick layer and one darker brick layer and work on all of them at the same time. Optional, you can just use the eraser to chip a bit at the bricks, so it will look more organic. This is just optional, you can use it if you want, you can not use it, it's fine. I think the bricks look perfectly fine with sharp edges or a bit chipped one. So we're almost done with the brick wall, the stone wall. And for the next few steps I will just go ahead and add small little details. I'm still using the G pen, a bit of eraser and the airbrush. It's nice to make a few little details so you can add more texture to the stone. And you do this for each and every one of them. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but don't worry, it's totally worth it. Of course, if you're making a brick wall or a stone wall, you can actually duplicate whatever you're making. But I still think you need to make at least 5 to 10 unique pieces. Of course, you can also use some texture brushes. So yeah, test them out, see if you like them. I mean, they can make your work a bit faster, so if you're in need of extra time, you should use the brushes you're comfortable with. But for this tutorial, I'm just using the default ones, so it's gonna take a while. But it's fine, we're almost there. I made a new multiply layer and just add a bit more shadows on the edges. I also used the eraser to make small dots on the multiply layer, and then you have extra texture and a bit of highlight, and repeat it on the rest of the tiles. I think I forgot to add a shadow under the bricks, but if you can and remember, just do that, it will look way better. And once you're happy with it, you can just merge everything up if you want to. If you don't, just work them separately and adjust the colors to your liking. I actually decided on a bluish tone, but I think I went back to the drawing and made it a bit more yellowish. And that's perfectly fine, you should go back and forth with the drawing. Sleep on it, just check it back in a few hours. You know, it's a learning process, so there are no mistakes, they're just happy accidents. Here I just made a new layer and added a new set of scratches, cracks, lines, texture. I like using a very dark color for it and also a very light highlight. And don't forget to make tiny scratches, I think they look really cute. So for now, just go with the flow and add a bit of shadow and a bit of highlights and just have fun. I think this part of the process is really fun. We've already done the basic shape, we've done shadows, highlights, everything, texture, so this is really just a fun part to do because there are no specific rules. I mean, just follow whatever you already made and accentuate some parts of it. This is the part where I told you I took a small break, went back and actually changed the color to be a bit more yellowish and also less shiny. I forgot it's a stone, so stones don't reflect that much light. Up to the next object, we're trying metal. And we're just doing the same steps we already did, just make basic shapes on different layers. So since metal is very, very shiny, it's going to look really nice next to the other objects. And here I'm just adding a small outline to the shapes so it will have more depth. And since it's metal and it's very shiny, I'm mainly using the airbrush with soft blue tones and dark gray shadows. It's okay if you have a lot of contrast in this case, since it's reflecting the light a lot. Well, metal is reflecting light, therefore huge contrast, it's fine. So for now they actually look like paper, so I actually added some metal screws. So it's just a small dot with a dent underneath. A dent is really easy to make if your dot has darker shadows underneath, make the dent lighter underneath. Wow, how do I explain this in words? Let's try again. It's just a dot and a bigger dot underneath it, upside down. There. Okay, next step, we are making highlight. It's metal, so just use the blurry airbrush to make highlight and erase parts of it so you can make a pointier shape. Also use the highlight on the edges, it's going to look very good. Actually looks more like aluminum. Let's go with that. So it's very shiny. If you want to draw a mirror, I think this is a good example to use. A good technique to use. Also don't forget to add the light underneath it. This is the under layer that I was talking about. It's easy to add shadows or add highlight without affecting the main base. Okay, so we're almost done with the highlight. I'm just adding a few more extra details. A bit more shine, a bit more shadows, and it's kinda done. I mean, you can leave it like this, but I felt the need to add a multiply layer and just add a bit more of a bluish tone for an extra color, I guess. Did you notice I didn't really use the G pen or the harsh pen, as I like to call it? I mainly use just the airbrush so I can actually have the smooth texture I was looking for in a metal plate. Words don't come easily, I'm sorry. And a bit more shadows. There. And it's done. I hope it's done. Okay, it's done. Color adjustment and it's good to go. On to the final piece. Stones. I think I called them pebbles the first time, but they're just stones. Uneven, weirdly shaped stones. For this part I like to use the lasso tool and just make random shapes and alternate between round and hard edges. And with the darker tone just make a few more shadows with the lasso tool and the airbrush. It's already looking like a stone, right? And also use the eraser to just erase, I guess, a bit of the tones. The next step, I'm just using a multiply layer and add extra shadows. Also lasso tool to delimitate the stones. Try and keep the shadows underneath, don't make the shadows everywhere. We still want the rocks to look a bit round, so just keep that in mind. Keep the shape in mind. And for the next step I actually just duplicate the layer and made it a bit darker. This way you can see that the stones actually have some kind of shadows underneath them. And on a new layer on screen mode, I started adding a few highlights. I used the G pen and actually erase parts of it. So a combination of brush plus eraser I think works very well. You need a lot of practice, but you can do it. It's a simple technique, anyone can use it. And if you have a fancy textured brush for the stones, I think it will actually speed up the process. Don't forget to zoom in and out of the canvas so you can actually see how the shape reads and where you need to add more shadows or more highlights. You can use the navigator for that if you want to, but I just got used to zooming in and out. So here I added a bit more airbrush. It's a new layer on multiply, and I actually added some dots to make it look more stone-like. And here I'm just adding small dots and lines, and I just noticed that rock has a new face on it. So don't overdo it, because we don't want to age it that much. However, since it's a stone and it's outside, it's okay if you make tiny cracks on it. And here just small highlights, the same principle. And I think it's almost done. I have been recording this for around 5 hours now, and it's only 15 minutes long. I think time works differently when you edit videos. This is just a fun fact, or I don't know, maybe I'm just really slow at it. And here we have the 4 materials that we made: wood, brick, metal and stone. So let's just say these are new materials. And for the next step, I actually want to age them. So I just duplicate the layers, merge them, and actually edit them just a bit. As you saw with the stones, I actually put them closer together. So let's jump right ahead. Since we're already done the basics, let's just go ahead and change the color contrast, the brightness contrast and the hue saturation contrast. Now in time wood actually gets darker, so it's okay if you just lower the brightness on it. And since, let's just say, many years have passed, you can also chip it. So just use the eraser for that, it's really easy. And on a new layer, just add more cracks, dots, scratches, everything. Just go wild, have fun. Just remember to follow the horizontal lines that you already made, since this will actually look like it, aged on its own. The lines get deeper and deeper, and the cracks get larger. I also wanted a bit of highlight, and I tested out a few colors between white, yellow and orange, and on different settings. So I actually stayed with the overlay on an orange tone. So add more lines, more shadows, more scratches, more dots. Just have fun with it. And for the last part, I actually wanted a dent. And since it's a dent, it's not naturally formed by the wood, it's man-made or made by animals, you can actually go in whatever direction you want with it. Well, that was easy, wasn't it? Of course, you can actually just draw the aged wood altogether, you don't need to go through the first step. However, I just wanted to show you how easy it is to make the transition. And also it might be a bit overwhelming to see how many details you need to add to age a material. But it's a simple technique. If you keep it simple, it's really easy to add details. Good base is probably the most important things, because details can be added later. And usually details are there just to make the base more prettier. Details are not there to hide a bad base. So for the stones, it's just the same process. I actually just used a very darker color and just went wild with chipping the stone and added big cracks all over the place. You can also add moss or plants in between the cracks, they usually grow there. And I just added more shadows on the edges so they won't look too sharp. And a bit of airbrush. Also zoom in and out to see how it looks like. And here I felt like the shape was too uniform, so I used the lasso tool to chip it a bit more. This way it actually looks like it's been damaged by the time. And make more dents, scratches, whatever you want. And when you're happy with the result, just maybe try out a bit of color like green or red, just a few airbrush tones. It looks good enough. I also added a bit of highlight, but really just a bit. I think I forgot to mention, in time some stones get darker and some stones get lighter with the passing of time. I think it depends on the stone and where it's at, the whole nature factors, like is it in the sun, is it in the water, is it near traffic. And for the final steps, a bit more scratches and dots. I like making these. They just put a bit of accent. Okay, so let's move on to the next material. I adjusted the colors, I made it a bit darker, and now I'm actually testing out something that will look like rust. So it's a layer on multiply mode, and I just added some orange and brown airbrush strokes. And after that, just use a smudge tool or the blend tool, I don't know how you call it. I think I actually renamed the tool, but it's the default one that you actually smudge. And since we're working with metal, everything kinda slides off of it. So for a rust effect, it actually works pretty well. The smudge tool actually works pretty well. I also added a bit of a highlight, a more yellowish tone. However, by the time I finished with this part, I actually discovered a new, easier way to make a rusty effect. I'll show it soon. So I'm just adding more dots and more smudge effect. Here I'm testing out different effects because I wasn't very happy with it. Just a warning, don't use the smudge effect too much because it's so wobbly, it's gonna look like a painting. Just a small warning, if you have not a very powerful PC or laptop, the smudge tool might take forever to render. I actually had that problem in another program. In Clip Studio I didn't really have any issues with it. It's one of the reasons I'm using it now, because it's very smooth, the transition is very smooth. So for the next parts I'm adding scratches, and since it's metal you want a very light line next to a very dark line. This way you can actually see the dent is very deep. And that also means the material is very hard and sturdy. Try to keep the lines relatively straight. I think straight lines work better on metal. And this is the technique I actually wanted to show you. Just duplicate the layer, make it a bit more yellow, duplicate it, make it a bit more orange, and erase parts of it. And there you have it, instant rusty effect. These layers are placed underneath, and over them it's what we've worked on up until now. But I think it looks pretty cool without it, without all the smudge effect and lines. Sometimes you learn as you go, so that's perfectly fine as well. Next up, the stones. So I wanted to make this particular stone a lot more lighter. Let's just say they've been in the sun many years, and they also now have a more yellowish tint. And also I want them on the ground, so just use the lasso tool and add a bit of grass. Green, add green. And make a layer underneath everything and just cover the spaces with a green color. I'm almost tempted to leave it like it is now, but let's continue and add some more cracks and dots and lines and scratches. A lot of damage, I guess. No strict rules, so just have fun. And also maybe keep the same colors. I also use the eraser to make the cracks a bit more soft. And don't forget to make many shape variations. Also add a bit of highlight in random places. Well, I guess that's about it with this one. Here I just use the eraser to chip a bit the edges. And I added a bit more grass. No need to add details in every single place. I mean, the stones are already very detailed. No need to make a lot of details on the grass. And for some final steps, I just added a bit more shadows. Similar to the first step, just use lasso tool and add a bit of airbrush shadows. And that's about it. Zoom in and out and see how you like it. See if you want to add extra details or just erase some things. And in my case, I just wanted to add a bit more dots. Dots are pretty. I like making them. And one final step, just use the lasso tool and make a layer underneath the grass layer and add a bit of shadows. There you can see the difference between each result. Okay, so let's start on the illustration. So I checked out some photos for inspiration and I started out with a sketch. I wanted something that looks like a gate, I wanted a building, and I wanted something that looks like a Gothic arch. I'm going to use different colored stones and a lot of grass. And maybe a wooden gate. You know, I'm not really sure at this point, so it's more of a trial and error process. I do have a perspective grid, but I'm not very good at it at the moment, so I just prefer using, you know, simple lines, 2-point perspective. Here I'm still working on a sketch and see how it feels. I really like making sketches. I feel like they're very dynamic. Sometimes in the final piece you actually lose some of the crispiness of the sketch. And here I'm just adjusting spaces and lines and things, I guess. I also flip the canvas horizontally to see any possible mistakes. And I just kinda go with the feeling. See how the line flows and see if I like the mood. So here I made a new layer and I actually wasn't really sure what to start with. So I thought a good idea would just be to start with the sky. So that's what I did. I made a gradient and I tried adding some clouds. Just simple shape. I can always come back and work on them. I also made a lot of color adjustments. I used the eraser and I also used the smudge tool. The smudge tool is really fun for clouds. Just don't overdo it. Let's just say it's very windy, so the clouds are being smudged on the sky canvas. Okay, so next step I just wanted to place some basic colors just to get an idea of the mood and vibe, and I will use these colors to later color pick them and also adjust the colors if needed and keep testing things out. I'm not very concerned about the light or anything like that at the moment. I just wanna get the color feeling. And shapes and repeating colors. Try not to use too many colors, just pick 3, because you can later add more if you need to. However, it's pretty hard to delete them. So I wasn't in a very good space when I worked on this illustration. I was really tired, so I couldn't think very clearly. Therefore, a lot of errors have been made, and this is one of them. So I thought it would be a good idea to just use the stones I already made as a pavement. So I just tried to mash them all together and place them on the grass. And as you can see, it looks pretty awful. But hey, I learned something. I mean, that's the point, right? We always learn new things. Here I'm still trying to save what I've done. And it's a whole mess. Yeah, no. So I try to get my mind off of it and start working on something else. I thought this would be easier, but it wasn't. So I just tried to make the shape as I did in the sketch. I'm using the curve tool. It's a fun little tool if you need to make straight lines or curved lines. And here I'm trying to make extra details, and sometimes I just kind of go with the flow, see if it works. If it doesn't, you know, you can always start over. And if you're not sure what to do, you can just take a 10 minutes break and, you know, maybe new ideas will come out. And that's what I did. So I actually started off with making the grass and making the gate, I guess. So sometimes it's just easier to work on a flat surface, and after that just adjust it to a perspective. And after I made the gate, I actually duplicate the layers and place it underneath the gate. This is going to help having a depth, or making the wall look like it has surface. It's really just the same technique we actually did in the warm-up sketches. Just make new layers with the same shape underneath them or over them, and add a different color so you can differentiate between them. And look, we actually have something that looks like a gate now. Just focus on the basic shape, we can render it after. Here I made a new layer and I added a symmetrical grid line in the middle. And I'm actually working on the arch. I did look at the photo to have a reference, because I don't think I have drawn a Gothic arch before. And so I added details. I knew I wanted this arch to be in perspective, and I also knew it might be very difficult to add details to it if it is in perspective. So I thought it's a good idea to actually put in all the main details here while it's flat on the screen. And this way I knew it is going to look good in perspective as well. I intentionally didn't add the damage part, the scratches, because scratches might look off in perspective. So I intentionally left them for the last step in the illustration. So I just worked on making something that looks like a brand new arch in a more earthy brown color. I was actually planning to do this technique on every single building piece, but I wasn't very sure if I have enough time, because it's very time consuming, this technique. Plus I only use 2 brushes, so I have to add a lot more details by hand than if I was just using a texture brush. So you need to adjust your time, your technique, and, you know, make it all work out somehow. Oh, and also be adaptable, very adaptable. So here I'm just adding more details to the arch, using the same things as I did in the material warm-up studies. So nothing new here. I think the symmetrical ruler is pretty fun to work with. Just be aware that if you erase some parts of it, it might not go to the other side as well. So next steps, I usually like to merge what I've done because I don't want to have too many random layers. And yeah, I put the arch in perspective. And it's a lot of trial and error for me, so I did struggle a bit. And since I've struggled so much, I actually decided to make a grid. Like something that looks like a proper grid, or at least I tried. I'm using the ground as a horizontal line, and I just, just made a few lines and adapt them to the grid. And that's about it. And I continue to try and fix the buildings I already done. Since the Gothic arch looks a bit flat at the moment, just duplicate it, place it underneath and just move it around a bit. Easy way to make something look more 3D. And you can always go back and adjust colors, make new colors, draw something else on it. And next step, I'm trying to make a basic shape for a tree. So just add splashes of colors. And I wanted to add an extra detail, so I still had the flat arch and I actually just chopped it off and see if I can make a shape that I like and I want to use it. So it's a lot of testing things out, I guess. I kinda liked it, but it also looked kinda weird. And if I can make something work, might as well just, try it again and again, or just ditch the whole idea and try a new one. Or work on something else and come back to the other idea. I mean, it's fun to watch it, but it's no problem. You learn by making errors. And the more you work on one thing, the more you gain experience. So just keep at it. There is always something to learn. And there are going to be many failures, but it's okay. Just try again. Or know when to stop, or know when to change the direction. I would like to remake this drawing maybe in a few years just to see, improvements. So I'm still trying to figure things out here. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing, and that's fine. But I really wanted to make this shape work. This kind of corner that goes to the arch. So it's getting there, it's okay. I'm also not very worried about the colors at the moment. I just want to make the shape right. So one step at a time. I also tried to see if I can use some pieces in other places, but some work and some didn't, and I had to delete some parts, and that's okay. It's a learning process. I also had a lot of fun with this drawing, so that's that. Just try not to get frustrated with yourself or with a drawing, because sometimes we forget we work in the creative field, so our feelings might come up in the drawings that we're working on. On that note, I do know I was very tired while working on this drawing, so I feel like I should have just take a longer break, sleep, and come back to it with a fresh mind and mindset and energy. Here I also tried out things that didn't quite work out, and I learned that they didn't work out, so that's okay. Small steps for each piece. And don't forget, details can be added later. Just work on the main, shape. And after you are happy with the main shapes, it's always easier to just render things out afterwards. This is actually the hardest part in my opinion, just making a base that reads good. I know it sounds like the rendering part takes forever, but I think making the base takes a lot longer, especially in terms of, thinking and the energy expanded towards that. Composition and color scheme and objects and everything else. I mean, look how fast I did the sky. The rendering part, I think it's way faster if you just use texture brushes or tools like the smudge tool or, sparkles, light, photos, anything like that. At this point I felt confident to just try and add the building in the back. So I did the same steps as shown up until now. Since it's a building in the back, I didn't want to add too many details, but I do want to have a simple, easy to read base. So I was actually focusing on that. Well, I was pretty okay with the shape, so I just added to perspective and merged the layers that I wanted to be merged. Duplicate the layer or copy the layer and make another level to the building, and another one if you want to. So for now, still testing things out. I'm adding more grass and leaves, vines, and a lot of green. I wanted to look like an abandoned space, but a more fantasy look-alike, a more idyllic place, I guess. And now I just go back and forth with the sketch and just resize the buildings if I feel the need to, and move them left or right. And I also decided to make some kind of path, and I used the eraser to just try and make some kind of pebbles. I mean ground stones. A road? Let's go with that. So I decided to give it another try. I took the stones and added them to the building. Color adjust, duplicate, make a wall. And since I wasn't really sure if it's going to look okay, I actually started out with a smaller piece. So I did that. This is the Mesh Transform tool. You can find it in the edit bar up screen. So I was pretty happy with the shape, and I changed the mode to, I think, multiply. You can just play around with the settings, see how you like them. I also applied the same technique to the other part. Not much to say here, I just tried to do the same thing on the other side, retracing my steps. Well, that worked pretty great. I'm actually very confident now. I also added more shadows and cracks and a bit of light. I also like to work on many parts of the canvas at once, so you will actually see me go between a lot of objects, adding stuff to them, rendering them, deleting them. I think it's better not to stay in one spot until you finish it. Just go around, walk the canvas, it's fine. And it's also helpful to see possible mistakes, because if you work too much on one thing, you actually have problems noticing mistakes. You actually become numb to what you're seeing it. That's why it's best every hour or so to just take a few minutes break away from the actual work. And here I'm just adding just small details. I don't overdo it, I just kinda wanna have the feeling that it's more complete. I can always go back and, render it some more. And here I'm actually working on the pavement. There I found the word. So I'm just adding more shapes and deleting the very edgy ones. So no pointy rocks. It's supposed to be a pavement, so you want to walk on it and you want to have round stones. And it's an old building, an abandoned old building, so in time the stones actually get rounder. Unless they actually broke, then they're pointier. Just have fun and do whatever rocks you want to do. It's okay. We are working with, expressing a feeling, emotions, and vibes. That's what artists do. The next step is, as usual, just add a bit of shadow, use lasso tool, use eraser, use whatever brush you want, and just make it work gracefully. And here I added some tiny grass. Everywhere. I added grass everywhere. This was probably the most relaxing part of the whole illustration. And here I went with an airbrush and added some darker shades and lighter shades. And also I started adding some cracks on the pavement. And some highlight as well. I am planning something again, so let's try it again. So I just used the brick wall, the wall stone, and actually tried to add it to that building piece. And somehow it kind of works. So I was happy about that. Here I just made some cracks on the Gothic arch. And going back and forth to add more shapes. And would you look at me, I'm planning something else again. I'm going to use the wood as the gate door. Let's see how that works out. And it works, kind of works. I also deleted the interior of the gate, so now you can actually see the sky underneath it. And just continue, render it out. And also change the gate a few times. And make some extra new damage on the door. And on a multiply layer, let's add more damage to the wall and shadows and a bit of highlight. Here I kinda went about adding and deleting things on the wall. And sometimes I don't really know what I'm doing, but it's gonna be fine. I actually made a small tree there, but in the end it wouldn't stay. So to save up time, I'm actually going to use the cracks I've made on the wall and just move the layer on the new illustration wall. Adjust it on multiply, I think, and just see if it can work. I actually added this crack to the arch as well. And here I thought it would be a good idea to just make some leaf shadow overlay. I mean, it did look fine, but in the end I decided not to use it. I just made a few lines, a few eraser spots, and added a blur on it. And here I tested out some branches to see if they might work. And I kinda had mixed feelings about them, so I didn't keep them. So I decided to go back to the tree and just work that out and try to render as much as possible. I used the lasso tool and just normal brushes. And since I'm drawing leaves, I just used the G-pen and just kind of make a lot of points and lines. I also color pick a lot of the existing colors and just work around them. I don't have much to say here, I'm just trying to be a bit random. Because it's nature, so it's usually a bit chaotic. It's best to just, I guess, make a bit of a random shapes. And don't worry too much about it. By this point I really want to use a leafy brush. I'm not gonna lie, it's been just a bit painful to work on this big illustration with just 2 brushes. But it's doable, so that's the most important thing. I think I will need to work on this illustration for at least 10 more hours if I continue to use just 2 brushes. I feel like I need to make more details that you can actually make more easily with a texture brush. So here I'm adding a smaller tree or a vine or both just because I feel the need to add some details in this part of the canvas. I feel like it's a bit too empty. I also should work on the huge building in the back, but I'm a bit scared, so I keep trying to avoid it. Maybe it will go away. I'm testing things out again and trying the branches one more time. I still don't particularly like them, but at least I give it another try. No regrets. I tried, okay? I did try. But it's not working out. And it's not you, it's me. Sometimes you have to let it go. And I did not, I actually tried one more time. Okay, vines, I'm adding some vines. These are really relaxing to make. I just feel like you need to follow straight lines. And more details everywhere. It's about time I worked on the arch. It looked pretty empty. At this point I'm kinda lost in all the layers, but I'm trying my best. Just extra details. I'm not too worried about this one. I just want to make it look like the rest of the building, so not too many details. Did you notice I still keep avoiding the big building in the back? Maybe I should leave it like that. More details and vines and grass, and oh my god, I'm actually working on the huge building. So I think it was actually around 3 AM for me, so I did cut corners and used the existing textures. And here it's the same technique as with the arch on the building. Just duplicate the arch as many times as you want and add it underneath one another with different colored shapes. And this time I started to feel really overwhelmed with this piece. Seems like I would never ever finish it. So I actually wanted to add a bit more atmosphere to it and added some fog with the lasso tool and actually smudged it a bit. And also used the eraser to make it more see-through. And just added a bit more details in the back. I felt like the building was just way too empty, so it needed a bit of color. So at this time I thought I'm done with this drawing, so I merged everything up and just added some final color, light adjustments and small dots of light, just to help with the atmosphere. And around this time I actually closed everything and I went to sleep for 5 hours. And now, since I have a clear mind, I actually saw a lot of the problems I didn't saw before. So I actually worked for around 5 more hours trying to polish this drawing. And I actually went through a lot of layers and edited them. So it's not much to see now, I'm just trying to figure out what to keep and what to delete. And what to merge, and yes, what to move around. Here I'm almost done with figure things out. So I actually start working on the parts I planned on. So I changed the sky a bit, I changed the building a bit, I added a bit of light, I cut some parts off and I also added extra parts. Here I actually started working on the building in the back. And I've redone the vines. I'm really quite happy with how this looks now. I don't have much to say here, it's just a process of rendering. I also discovered that I needed to use smaller size brush, and I've been doing that for the rest of the drawing because, you know, leaves are smaller, so better use a smaller size brush. I also added some extra cracks, extra damage to the building. And some extra light and some extra blue light from the sky. I did play around with the sky a bit more, and it's okay to just test things out and see if you like them. I wasn't sure, so I did a few tests. And some extra fog. Sometimes I like to zoom out the canvas because it's easier to see the shapes, so in this case I'm actually working on a zoomed out canvas. And when I need to add details and where I need to add details, I just zoom in. So yes, a smaller brush because leaves are small in this case. This was a mistake I made the previous version, and I just noticed it like now. That's why it's good to take some breaks. But also use a good technique to actually, you know, finish faster. A lot of dots. Many dots. Did you notice how time consuming this part is? I mean, sure, it's just the rendering part, but yeah. A leaf brush would be just great now. So I guess just keep working until, you know, you're satisfied with the result. Yes, I don't have much to say this, so well, let's just enjoy the process, I guess. Thank you for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot of things, and so I hope you learned too. See you in the next video. Bye bye.